Tara Bentley, and I'm the Executive Director for the Indiana Association of Home Educators, otherwise known as the IAHE.
Hi, I'm Cindy Briggs. I'm a homeschool mom and a volunteer with IAHE.
We're here bringing you this podcast to share with you a lot of great information about homeschooling here in Indiana. This will be a place to learn about homeschooling, find the support you need, all in the Hoosier State.
Each week, we're going to focus on a different topic in the homeschool world. We'll bring you special guests and information that's going to help you on your homeschool journey. So let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this next episode of a Homeschool Indiana podcast. I'm Tara Bentley. Cindy isn't with me today, but I have a good friend, nationally known speaker, author, Israel Wayne. Hey, Israel, how are you?
Hey, Tara. It's great to be on the podcast with you. I'm doing great.
Well, we were chatting just a little bit before we got started, and I know that this is in the midst of your very, very busy travel season across the country. So I really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us today. And you are just north of me. Nationally speaking, you are our northern neighbor from Michigan.
Yes, absolutely. I live near Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is, I think, 4 hours north of Indianapolis. So and I'm actually born a Hoosier. Indiana's my birthplace. So definitely have some strong connection to Indiana and live just north of the border by probably an hour. So we love our Indiana homeschool friends.
Well, we really love and appreciate you too. And you also serve on your board of directors up there in Michigan. So we love other state leaders even more.
Well, Michigan Christian Homeschool Network, MICHN, or Mission, as we call it, does what IAHE does in Indiana. We do that in Michigan. And basically, our goal is to take as many good ideas from Tara as we can and implement them here in Michigan. So it's all flagrant plagiarism here in the northern state. But we really appreciate her creativity and ingenuity in leading Indiana, and we benefit from that quite a bit here in our own state. So we're grateful for Indiana in that way as well.
Well, we appreciate that, and you are always welcome to it. So let me read officially your bio, and then we'll jump into a conversation. We're also going to highlight at the end, make sure you listen all the way through. If you are listening to this in early June, we're recording today, Monday, June 3rd. A week from today, on June 9th, you will be with us here in Indianapolis for a free one-day event in conjunction with the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you're hearing us in time, make sure you stick to the end for information on that, and we'll drop a link in the show notes as well. So let me read your bio here. Israel Wayne is an author and conference speaker who has a passion for defending the Christian faith and promoting a biblical worldview. He is the author of 8 books. I hope that number is still right, including Education, Does God Have an Opinion? Answers for Homeschooling, Raising Them Up, Foundations in Faith, and more. He's also the site editor for ChristianWorldview.net and founder of Family Renewal. He and his wife, Brooke, live in Southwest Michigan and are the homeschooling parents of 11 children. Are all those numbers still accurate?
I think so. Yeah, surprisingly. Yeah, it's amazing. Usually we have to update our website constantly, but that's all still good. So it doesn't mention that I was homeschooled. My wife was also homeschooled. Our families both were beginning back in the pioneer days of the homeschooling movement. My family started homeschooling in 1978. Brooke's family started in 1983. So we were home educated back in the days before it was popular. And in my case, actually, before it was legal, homeschooling, I graduated in 91 and homeschooling became legal in the state in which I lived in 1992, the very next year.
Oh,
so very different era at that time to be home educated. My high school years, my mom was a single parent, and she ended up being a very key player as kind of a founder of the early homeschool movement in publishing a national homeschool magazine. And so she was a conference speaker and author, and I actually kind of followed in her footsteps in homeschool publishing as well as speaking. Started working in the publishing company full-time in January of 1993. So it's been well over 30 years now that I've been involved in this line of work, and I love it and am grateful for the opportunity to still be involved.
So I think that it's very interesting. You've shared, being homeschooled by a single mom, and I know that you often get caught behind a table talking to somebody who says, "Oh, I could never do that. I could never homeschool," or "I don't think I'm not smart enough," or "I don't know this," or "I don't know that." So, what's your answer to them, given your history?
Sure. Well, I actually wrote a whole book on that called Answers for Homeschooling, the top 25 questions critics ask. And I have heard all of those questions multiple times. And I think ultimately it comes down to the want to factor. If someone really wants to teach their children at home, I believe that God will provide a way. He'll provide a path for them to be able to do so. They may not be able to get there instantly. You can't always get from point A to point Z in one step. They may have to have a plan and a strategy. Maybe they won't be able to homeschool this year, but I believe that there's a way that they can get there if they really want to. I think for most people, ultimately, it comes down to that it's just not that big of a priority for them. And
Right.
if you're not terribly motivated to want to do it, then you can find a billion excuses of why not to. But if you really feel like that's the best path for your child, I absolutely believe there's a way. I saw that again in my own experience growing up, to be able to be homeschooled in a time where there were very few resources, there was very little support. My mom just had a tenacious commitment that this was something she was going to do. So I'm thankful for that in my life that she was willing to sacrifice to make that happen, and God definitely provided and made a way.
Absolutely. So you've gone from that, you're a second generation homeschooler, coming from the foundations, the pioneer days, to being not only a nationally known speaker, but internationally. And I know that last fall you were given this great opportunity to go speak in South America. And I forget how many, well, you'll tell us how many times you got to speak during that trip. I know it was a lot and it had to be very eye-opening for you. And I'd love to hear you just share a little bit about, their view on home education versus kind of our modern take on homeschooling as just this option.
Well, it's really interesting that in South America, really all around the globe, but in South America, homeschooling is blowing up. It's exploding. And there's a great interest in Christian education across the board. A lot of it has to do with some of the same concerns we have in the United States about all of the transgenderism and Marxism and just really woke ideologies that are being pushed really heavily in the schools. The pastors and parents there are very concerned. And so they're looking to start Christian schools. Most of them were not very familiar with homeschooling, but they're open to the idea of Christian education in general. So I was invited to go speak initially at it was a conference for all of South America that happened in Paraguay. And so there were leaders from all around Latin America that flew in to this kind of national conference, if you will. And but then as I had accepted that invitation, I kept getting more and more invitations
Oh, wow.
from other places, and it kept snowballing. And even when I was there, like after I booked my flight and my itinerary, we kept getting invitations. So I ended up speaking at 20 different conferences in three countries, in multiple cities, in Paraguay, Peru, and in Colombia. So it's in Lima, Peru, and then Medellin and Bogota and Cali and other places in Colombia. It was just an amazing experience. It was grueling. I was there 28 days, so it was like 20 events in 28 days.
Wow.
But a definite memorable experience for me, and just to see the hunger that people have there for Christian education. I definitely wanted to present the homeschooling option for people to consider and think about. And many of them said, like, this is something we'll have to think toward and pray towards. The big struggle that they have there is not having adequate K-12 Christian curriculum in Spanish. And I'm shocked that we just don't have more fully orbed K-12 Spanish curriculum, because there's
Right.
such a huge audience in Latin America. I'm just surprised it hasn't become a priority for more curriculum publishers. But that's the thing that caused the homeschooling movement to explode in 1983, when Dr. James Dobson had Raymond Moore on the broadcast, and thousands of families started homeschooling. is that we had had the Christian school movement in the 1970s that laid the foundation. So when people wanted to find curriculum, there it took a while for these curriculum companies to agree to sell to homeschoolers, but we had groups like ACE and Bob Jones and Abeka, and then later Alpha Omega that were designed for Christian schools that said, hey, we could start selling to homeschoolers. And so there was a Christian curriculum in our language. And that's been the thing that's kind of hindered, I think, the expansion of homeschooling around the globe is that that hasn't happened in a robust way globally. And so people are hindered by not wanting to use the secular curriculum that's in their language. And we just don't have enough material. So, as people are thinking about opportunities and just maybe ways to serve the Lord through missions, I think one of the greatest ways that we could do that is to create biblical worldview K through 12 curriculum in languages all around the world to help facilitate homeschooling.
Wow. That's really important, very interesting. I think that one of the things that it obviously it starts with these big publishers and they lead the way. But I know even when I started homeschooling, I learned very quickly that a lot of the materials written for Christian schools weren't the best ones for me to use at home. So, but that's a neat. It'll be neat to watch to see what the evolution of that is in those communities. And you may get invited back for another 28-day marathon.
It's very possible. I just had my Answers for Homeschooling book was translated into Portuguese. And they say that Brazil now is probably the number 2 nation in the world for homeschool population, even though it's still illegal in Brazil. They
Wow.
had a conference there last year. I did not speak at that one, but Mike Donnelly, I think, was there, Kevin Swanson, several others. And it was like 4,000 people that came to this conference in Brazil. And so, so Portuguese is another language where we need resources. And I actually had a chance to speak in Portugal a couple of years ago. And again, great interest in homeschooling all around the world. So it's fun. And I agree with you. Some of the best materials that we have today for homeschoolers were actually created by homeschoolers. And
Right.
so, what an amazing opportunity that families have overseas to even start thinking themselves entrepreneurially about the ability that they have to just start writing curriculum that can be used for homeschooling. And I know that's daunting and intimidating, but really some of the best homeschool curriculum that we have that are now fairly large publishing houses were created by homeschool families. And so I think that could happen internationally as well.
And I can't wait for someone to come to us to say, I have this massive publishing company now because I heard this great idea
Absolutely.
conversation with Tara and Israel. Like
That
that'll be
would be
amazing.
amazing. That'd be awesome.
Okay, so let's switch to so your ministry is called Family Renewal,
Mhm.
and you have your books and you speak and you publish, but I want to talk about the 3 keys that you have for Family Renewal. What led you to start this ministry? And the 3 keys that you have are biblical marriage, biblical parenting, and Christian education. So let's talk about how you started the ministry and how these 3 things work together.
Yeah, what was interesting to me was about that is my mom was involved in homeschool leadership way early on in the 80s. But I wasn't that sold on homeschooling. Like as a student, I liked it. I mean, I had a good experience. But I remember having a conversation as a young teenager with my mom and telling her, I don't know if I'll homeschool my own children. Like I just don't know that I would follow that same path. It was only years later that I kind of developed more of a biblical conviction for specifically, distinctly, Christian home-based discipleship. But I wanted to get into youth ministry. And I actually had a radio show for teenagers. And I would travel around and go to teen hangouts like roller skating rinks or malls or places where teenagers were, youth groups. And I would interview teens and we talk about kind of current event issues that were relevant for teenagers. I worked in like the children's ministry, youth ministry within my church. And at a certain point, as I became an older teenager, it really dawned on me we're getting these kids too late, especially the teenagers. Like the cement's already hard. And I started to think that we just weren't seeing fruit through the efforts that we were doing, busing kids from the neighborhood into church and so forth. And we just were not seeing lasting change. There was a lot of kind of a revolving door of kids that kind of came through, but they didn't stay with the church. They didn't really grow in terms of discipleship. And somehow along the line, it dawned on me if we want to reach children and youth, we need to get their parents. How do we do that? And then, kind of, inadvertently, it dawned on me, oh, wait, that's what my mom's trying to do. And so I hadn't put that together. But I was like, oh, I guess she's already kind of doing that. And then I just saw the fruit of thousands of families who would write her letters or, would contact her, or talk to her at conferences and would say, we started reading your homeschool magazine or we read your homeschool books and we started homeschooling our children and it changed our lives. And then just seeing the long lasting fruit that parent led discipleship made in these families. And I thought, oh, okay, so this is a paradigm that actually seems to be working. And of course, now we know from lots of studies like the Gen 2 survey and Nehemiah Institute's research and other groups that statistically home education has a vastly superior outcome in terms of young people embracing the Christian faith, developing a biblical worldview, and so much more. So, I really kind of came into it slowly and didn't make the connections as early as I should have. But I think that path of me, feeling like I was beating my head on a brick wall, trying to work within our traditional institutional structure of how we've been taught that we're supposed to make disciples working with teens and youth, just seeing the ineffectiveness of that compared to the effectiveness of God really getting parents' hearts and parents discipling their own children. And I want to be careful. I don't want to, cast a grenade in the direction of people who are trying to do effective work with children and youth. But that work really should be supplementary, not trying to replace parents. And I think that's been the problem within the evangelical church, is that parents have really been just negligent in discipling their own youth, have sat back and expected the church to do it for them, and that has not worked.
Right. And so you mentioned a couple studies, and I'll drop those links in the show notes for everybody. It's been quite a while, but I was there when they presented the Gen 2 study. It's actually at the Creation Museum over in my kind of backyard when that was presented years ago. But talking about that the biggest indicator for whether or not a child will walk away from their faith really comes down to the parents and education and homeschooling. You know, we want to say it's not about the odds, right? Homeschooling won't save your children, but
That's
it
right.
the environment the safest and the most likely that your child will not walk away from their faith.
Yeah, and I think also as parents, I mean, I think we have to be careful that we don't become pragmatists, and I'll define that. Pragmatism is the view that whatever works is right, and so we'll engage in any methodology as long as it produces the right outcome that we're looking for. And as Christians, our goal should simply be obedience, because God doesn't hold us responsible for outcome. He holds us responsible for input, and that's what we can do. Like that's what we have control over. And
Right.
so as Christians, obviously, particularly with raising our children, we realize that our children will have to make their own choices and find their path, but we as parents are responsible for what we lead them into. And so as a parent, I have 11 children and I don't have any guaranteed outcomes with my children, but I want to be sure that I've done everything within my capacity to make sure that I've put in the right things, that as much as possible, I have led them in the way that they should go. And so that's the responsibility that I have. And when I look in the scripture, I don't find the Bible telling me to send my children to be educated by the government. I don't find the Bible telling me send my children to non-Christians to have them teach my children for 10 to 14,000 hours. I don't find instruction to make sure that my kids are thoroughly indoctrinated in evolution, Marxism, and gender dysphoria. I find the scripture telling me they're supposed to be raised in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And
Right.
so those are things that I have responsibility over. I have choice. Am I going to be obedient in that? And I believe God will hold me accountable for what I do, for the effort that I put in to be faithful in what the Scripture instructs me to do, and then I have to just trust God for the results in that, and to trust that God continues to work even after our children are grown, that the seeds are still there in their lives, and and that they know what is true and they know what to come back to. And praise God, I've seen a lot of young people, even though they were raised in Christian homes or raised even homeschooling, that sometimes they go off on their own path and they cycle back. And I've heard many testimonies where they say that they were grateful that they had a foundation and they knew what to come back to. And so that's a great privilege and opportunity that we have as Christian parents.
So in all of that, and you talk about not being convinced that you were going to homeschool, and now who you are now and your beliefs that you have now. I want to echo that because I'm a book hoarder. I just want to be very clear, and I don't give away a lot of things. But when I do want to give away a book on homeschooling, it's your book. But that's a compliment, right? That I'm giving away your book.
Thank you.
So
Appreciate
your
that.
your book, Education Does God Have an Opinion, I think is a must read for current homeschool parents, parents who are considering it, parents who, you're having a bad day or you have critics in your life. So what led you to write this? And because it is interesting to me because not all of our children go on to homeschool, and we know
Hmm.
that, and that's between them and
Hmm.
God. Um, but talk to me about this specific book, this question, this simple question, does God have an opinion?
Yeah.
And what led you to write that?
Well, actually, it was that conversation that I had with my
Okay.
mother, and I was like 13, I think, and I just said, hey, there's different strokes for different folks. There's public school, there's private school, there's homeschool. I don't think there's one right path. And I think you have to kind of evaluate every child, every year, what's right for them. And my mom was a baby Christian. I mean, she'd only been saved for a year by the time of this conversation, but she grew pretty quickly once she became a believer. And so, in typical homeschool mom fashion, she said, "That's an interesting thesis." She said, "I'd like you to write an essay on that thesis." And then she said, "But I want you to support your thesis from scripture. Don't just give your opinion, but support your viewpoint from the Bible." And I remember thinking, well, boy, that's going to be a short essay because the Bible doesn't say anything about education. God is pretty silent on the topic of education. But I thought, well, let me grab my Strong's Concordance here. And I opened it up. I looked under the word education, and sure enough, there wasn't anything in there. And I thought, oh, okay, well, see, I was right. God doesn't say anything. But then I thought about how the Bible does say, have words like learning or training or teaching or instruction. I started to look up some of those words, and then, of course, discipling and all these other kinds of concepts. And so I sort of went out and then I just thought about parenting, right? What does the Bible say about parenting and who really is responsible for teaching children? And it ended up being about a 25-year study. It just led me on a path of trying to find out what God had to say about education. And I learned that there were two truths from that essay assignment that I discovered. One was that my concept was wrong, that God didn't say anything about education. God has spoken voluminously about education. I was just ignorant, as most Christians are, about what the Bible actually says. So that's the first thing I learned. And the second thing I learned was that what the Bible said about education did not support my thesis. And so yeah, I ended up writing this book, Education Does God Have an Opinion, that was an accumulation of about 25 years of thinking and writing on the topic and a desire to really establish a biblical philosophy of education, to try to talk about what education would look like if we didn't start with the government school as our model. Like if we were stranded on a deserted island, and all we had was a Bible, and we were going to try to figure out what education should look like just from the Bible. What would it look like? I don't think we would land where we have with monstrosities like the Department of Education, even large brick buildings with football fields and lockers and classrooms and all that. I don't think that's what we would end up with if we were just looking in the scripture to try to figure out what teaching children was supposed to look like. And so that's really where that book came from. And I have been really thankful that God has used it to help thousands of families decide to homeschool, as well as just become more solidified in their convictions as to why. And I believe with any endeavor, we really should start with the why. And that gives us, I think, direction on the how. Because if you don't know what your end goal is, if you don't know what you're aiming at, then you can just be wasting time and effort. But when you're really focused on here's what our goal is, and then here's the path that we take to get there, you're much more effective. So that book is really the big picture, the educational philosophy, and then the Answers for Homeschooling book is kind of answering the objections with a lot of research and statistics, but also providing the practical how-to. So the two go together. Education Does God Have an Opinion is sort of the philosophy and the why, and then Answers for Homeschooling is the how and the research that supports the biblical philosophy, if that makes sense, to show that it actually the fruit of homeschooling actually plays out in real world experience.
Awesome. So I encourage everyone to pick up both of those books from Israel's website. We know you can go to Amazon, but go buy them from Israel, right? Like that's our recommendation.
Yeah, Amazon's doing fine. They'll be okay.
They'll be okay.
But we appreciate if you support our ministry. And I tell people, most people don't like to talk about numbers, but I tell people if you go to Amazon and you buy a $10 book from Amazon that I wrote as an author, I make like 65 cents.
Yeah.
And Amazon keeps the profits. And so we strongly encourage you if you can. My website is called familyrenewal.org. So familyrenewal.org and then /store. And any of my books that you purchase from our web store, I'll actually personally sign. And that's something Amazon won't do. At least I hope they're not doing that.
I'll say not yet, but wait,
Because I'm not doing it. But yeah, I will personally sign any books ordered on our web store. And that directly helps to support our ministry. And we do seminars all around the country on marriage, on parenting, on Christian education. And so we're available to speak at churches or conferences or family camps or different events. And so people can go to my personal website, or my speaking website, I should say, which is israelwayne.com if they want to get more information on that. But we do provide lots of events around the country. So if you go to familyrenewal.org, you can sign up on our email list to make sure you're notified whenever we're speaking in your area.
And then I'll encourage you to be like Tara and give the book away, right? Like I don't think I do everything right, but give the book away. Like buy extras and give the book away. Because if you have people, if you're a support group leader or you have a church leader, maybe that you want to give a book to, I'd recommend these. So in light of that, so last year you were supportive of a couple of projects that I was involved with. And so I'm a state leader here in Indiana. You're a state leader in Michigan. We're a part of a large alliance of state leaders across the country, and we get together once a year, but we have a website called homeschoolfreedom.com. And so we actually participated and had a booth at two events last summer. One was the Southern Baptist Convention that was in New Orleans last year, and then the Assemblies of God's conference in Columbus, Ohio. And we did exactly what I said. We gave away copies of your book thanks to the supporters that you have for your ministry. And you were actually able to be at the event in Ohio. And so you got to have a lot of conversations basically along these lines with church leaders. What surprised you about those conversations?
Well, I think the struggle that many pastors have had is that a lot of them feel in their heart that Christian education is the right choice for the families in their church.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they worry about being outspoken about it because there are so many people in their churches who are employed by the government school system. I mean, it's the largest employer in the United States. And so I think they know it's a hot button issue. There's strongly held viewpoints, and they don't want to create a civil war within their church. And I get that. And I understand their desire to be sensitive about that. But at the same point, I think we need to be honest with the fact that the government school system is not religiously neutral. It is actively anti-Christian. It is hostile to God. And I know everybody says, well, our school's different and we have a great school and they're not doing all that stuff in our school. Well, in most cases, they actually are.
Right.
The woke ideology has permeated almost every government school in this country. And if it hasn't reached your little school yet, it will. And so I think pastors just need that extra motivation and encouragement to become bold about the issue and to say Christian children need a Christian education. And so, yeah, we were blessed to be able to give away hundreds of copies of Education Does God Have an Opinion to church leaders and pastors last year. And just hoping again that they'll kind of catch the vision and really just become solid on it themselves because seminaries don't really teach them to think about these issues. And most pastors don't really study like a biblical theology of the family or a biblical theology of education. Those aren't courses that are covered in their seminary. And so we want to encourage them on that front and teach them to help equip the families, the parents in their church to disciple their own children. And so we understand it's a bit of what feels like a new territory to begin to do this. But from my viewpoint, this is not new. It's not radical. It's not revolutionary. This is just biblical Christianity 101. But the best way to pass on the Christian faith from generation to generation to generation is training up each new generation in the home. It starts there. The church can be a supplement to that. The church can be a support to that. But if we don't do it there, it won't happen. And the stats have been showing that for the last, at least 20 years. I mean, I know the SBC in particular, which was where we're getting ready to go again and try to have an outreach. Their council on family life said that they were losing 88% of all church youth before high school graduation that leave the church and say, we don't want any part of this. 88% fallout. I mean, we have to start thinking differently about this. We can't just keep doing the same things we've always done and expect different results. And so we believe that going back to what we believe is the biblical model of Deuteronomy 6 and Proverbs 22:6 and Ephesians 6:4 and all these passages, Psalm 78, we have a responsibility to disciple the next generation. I know IAHE is all about that. I'm all about that. And this organization that Tara works with that we call the Alliance is a network of state homeschool associations from across the country that have a commitment to this family discipleship message. And it's just been a blessing to be able to team up with them to start reaching church leaders. And so we're really excited about that.
Well, thank you for taking time today. I know you're only home for this one day, so thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. And if you are coming to the SBC this next week here, June 2024 in Indianapolis, I encourage you to come talk to us. Let us know that you heard this. If you are listening and maybe you aren't coming, but you are a Southern Baptist attendee and you know a pastor who's coming or another leader who's coming, encourage them to reach out. And then, of course, on Monday, the 10th, we have a one-day event. It's actually across the street in another hotel, but this is an event that is free and you will be with us. Zan Tyler will be with us. And we're having a morning session and an afternoon session, and it is free. You don't have to be a part of the SBC event in order to come. So if you're local or one of the states around us, if you're in Michigan, you are welcome to come on down and join us for this one free day. And so share about it, let people know. And Israel, again, thank you so much. Thank you for all that you're doing in Michigan and beyond. And what a great conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you, Tara. It'll be great to see you at the SBC conference in Indianapolis. And I hope some of our friends will make sure to make a point if they're going to be there to come be a part of the June 10th event as well. And also, I'll just throw this in there since I can.
Yeah.
If you're listening to the podcast and you are not supporting IAHE financially, you need to do so because they are on the front lines of defending homeschool freedom in Indiana. And one of the most important things that you can do to see homeschooling continue to grow and to thrive in Indiana is to support IAHE. That means attending their events, attending their annual conference, donating money to the organization, being a member, all of those things, connecting with your local regional reps, and making sure that you are giving back to the community. I want to highly recommend that you do that because they do so much work, but they need you. They're a network of homeschoolers from across the state, and they're representing you. But they provide great resources and great services, but they can't do it without you. So make sure that you support your state homeschool association.
Absolutely. No matter where you live, look them up, homeschoolfreedom.com, and great work being done by volunteers, homeschool parents across the country. So, okay. And I will see you soon. See you in Indy. And if you're listening, I hope we see you there too.